Thank you very much for joining us today. It is, as I've said to colleagues, great to see the interest we have in this topic. And I look forward to spend the next 45 minutes with you through this, as well as some Q&A. The topic for today is appropriate instructional technology for teaching IB. And really asking the question is, what do we need to think about when we pick technology tools? And of course, there are different modalities, teaching face-to-face, teaching blended, or teaching online. So we're going to ask a little bit and look at different ways of approaching that and what may be appropriate technology when we do this. My outline for today, I'm talking a little bit about the art of inspired learning, just give you a little bit of background about how I approach this. We'll talk about why technology in the classroom in any case. I'll do a very brief review of designing class experience. I really think that research is an important part of learning research on thinking through this. I have been doing this for quite a while, and so I think it's important we just touch on that a little bit. And then I'm going to share with you 3 examples of how I use technology in the classroom. So as far as myself and the art of teaching and inspiring learning, I, of course, do not come out of a research background. I come out of the private sector. I had a career doing international business. Much of what we teach in IB, I have done. Started as an entrepreneur, US, Germany, as a consultant, management consultant, worked with companies both as a consultant and as a manager, later exec manager in the manufacturing sector, and so also in the technology sector. And it's quite interesting as we're talking about online teaching and technology in the classroom at the moment. My first research was as a consultant was syndicated research I did on distance learning in 1990. Also on video conferencing and audio conferencing, and so also telemedicine. But I've spent quite a bit of time in this space. For me, it's important that we bring in the classroom, yes, some of us have a love for teaching, and we do this all the time. We may actually be somewhat good at it, but it's also important to bring some research and theory into play here. People have done a lot of work to provide the kind of background that we need to be sure that we know we are doing things on a solid theoretical foundation. I have directed, as Tamar said, some study abroad programs to South Africa, to India, to the UAE, and China. And all of these also, for me, the interest was, yes, the experiential part, the getting students to see the rest of the world part, but the academic rigor that goes with that, and thinking through how do you bring the academic learning and the experiential part together. And that also then translates into what I do in the classroom and online with technology. If you look at online learning, I started dabbling in online hybrid 12 years ago. I really seriously started teaching hybrid 8 years ago. So I've been doing this quite a bit. I have done some online teaching seminars with the GSU Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, and also AACSB's online teaching mastery workshop. So I also completed that. I have worked with cyber. Today, just a little bit looking forward, my interest is very much in working with technology to help teams to collaborate over distance, whether that's across borders, and in my role in the Dean's office, also not necessarily across borders, but how do we get teams to collaborate, and how do we use that technology-enabled collaboration in order to solve serious problems, manage people, and also then lead organizations. And so that's just where I'm coming from. And so before we launch in here, let's ask a question here. And Rebecca, if you can run this poll for us, why technology in the classroom? Do you really think that this learning is best with as little technology as possible? Is it just a distraction? Sometimes useful, but maybe changing all the time, difficult to use, all different technologies. helpful, you can enhance your learning, or are you one of those that are fully committed, transforming your teaching in powerful ways? So would like to have a little bit, you're thinking about this. How do you see technology? How do you want to use it? Or best stay away from that? Rebecca? Let's see how fast they are. Can we close that poll? Let's see what the results are. Okay, so 56% of you think that it's helpful, enhances learning experience somewhat. Oh, 24% of you are deeply in, 21% that sometimes useful. Nobody thinks that this is just a waste of time. I guess we have a self-selected audience here, don't we? Okay, let's then talk about technology in the classroom a little bit. So from my perspective, if you talk about technology in the classroom, it has been around for a while. Isn't a whiteboard or blackboard technology, or those of us that use overhead projectors? And then the real problem of all these devices in the classroom, more distraction than helpful. Then there's those clickers with which you engage students in the classroom, or maybe distract them. I think later this week, we will have Salomo talk a little bit about response systems. I think he's an example he's going to share with you on a webinar later this week. And then, of course, there's gamification. I know Fernando Doria has always been interested in this. Actually, Minecraft is a fabulous way to teach JavaScript. Is that a way to teach? We all have to deal with our learning management systems, whether they are Canvas or Blackboard, Desire to Learn, Moodle. And of course, they change every few years and you have to learn from scratch. So some of us have an ambiguous relationship with these. There are actually lots of powerful tools within them, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. Some of us have used wikis. Of course, then there's all these collaborative tools, Office 365, Google Docs, different kinds of technologies. Some of us have taught in classrooms that had multiple locations, where you had several classrooms at the same time. That brings its own challenges. And of course, in the last couple of months, all of us discovered a whole new life in front of screens like this, where we have to teach. And so technology has been there, and I think we now know technology is here to stay. Maybe that's why there's interest in this topic to the extent there is, and also why most of you that voted today in the poll said that you think that there's some role for that. But the question is then really, what do we do with that? How do we use that? Interesting work done by MIT Sloan on digital transformation, and it's not just in education, it's in general, makes this very important point that when it comes to digital transformation, that it's more about the transformation than it is about the digital. And so the slide I just showed you is all about digital devices. I'm going to talk a little bit about transformation and then how that technology fits into that, and we think about that. I love this quote by Westerman saying that if it's really a transformation, then it's like a caterpillar that turns into a butterfly. And if you don't do it well, all we will just have are really fast caterpillars. And I can tell you, I, for a while, was a really fast caterpillar. And hope that today we can talk a little bit about changing that, which is one of the reasons that I like to talk a little bit about the research underpinnings of all of this. There's an interesting model developed by Pontedora that says that, so you can talk about technology from an enhancement perspective, replacing some tools you already use in classroom. Instead of paper submissions, digital submissions. You can augment some of the things you do in the class by functionally improving what you're doing, your grade book, clickers for responses, videos for presentations. So these are all augmentation. But then there are also ways in which you can start thinking about let technology redesign significantly the tasks that you perform, both in your professional work, but also certainly in the classroom. And then also potentially really redefining completely what we do in terms of creation and in ways that we could not do in any other way. I'll hint a little bit in that direction today, but it's really the question asking, how do we use this. I will not bore you with a lot of theory, but there is a lot of underlying reasons to think about technology and how we use it. We're all familiar with Bloom, correct? And we all know that cognitive theory is what we've spent a lot. We're trying to desperately get people out of just knowing things to higher levels of learning. We often forget when Bloom did his work that he also talked about the psychomotor things, and that's getting students actively engaged in what they do in some way to learn skill sets, and also the connection to the affective, to the emotional response and value building that, and especially for us as educators, value building in terms of learning that is going on here. And technology may actually be very, very good at that. And when Crawlworth did the work with Bloom later on, they continue to do this, and they asked the question about how do we go from remember to create, but also how do we go from just factual information to metacognitive cognition. So always thinking deeper, and technology is actually a beautiful way to do that. When we look at learning experiences, and Kolb did some work on experiential learning, in which he said that you start with the feeling, the experiences of the students. And I know Roberto Garcia is going to spend some time with you later, I think next month, in some webinars here, talking about this a little bit, the connection and the emotional connection that is a part of learning, getting them to watch what you're doing, getting them to think on what you actually are doing, and then getting them to do something. And again, technology is a platform that allows us to do that so that they can maybe become lifelong learners. And so it's an important part of what I'm trying to do here is think through all of that. Now, when we talk about using technology in the class experience, how do we use technology to provide support? Vygotsky talked about the zone of proximal development. Basically, he says there are things I can learn on my own. There's things I need a lot of help to learn, and then there are things that it's going to really be difficult for me to master. We've all used scaffolding in class in some way. We know a lot about scaffolding. Maybe we can spend some time on that at another time, but knowledgeable workers provide scaffolding to help us build our knowledge. Technology tools are a great way to do that. So what does this really look like when we are trying to teach? You all have had a problem with a student that you're trying to move along in help along the learning here, skill levels more complicated, content more difficult, and you're trying to manage here in this zone to move them over time. And then, oh my gosh, they get all bored and, they are distracted, and technology is a major problem here. They get bored, they get distracted, they do other things. I wanted to at one point run a poll right here to say how many of you that have been on these endless webinars like this one in the last 2 months as we've been subject to COVID-19 sequestration, how many of you have done email, wrote papers, graded papers while you were working on somebody else's stuff? That's what your students' experience is if they're bored, if you don't make sure you keep them in the learning. And so the question here is, how do we use technology to do that without moving them into a space where they're completely confused? And so how do we design a class using technology to keep us in this zone? How do we bring the technology in as a way to provide us with help? And so I have a question for you. Rebecca, if you can run a poll for us here. When you look at designing your course, planning your course, how do you go about it? Do you basically find a textbook, get the PowerPoints, teach the PowerPoint, do the test from multiple choice, and repeat next semester? Maybe your department picks the textbook for you, gives you the PowerPoints, and runs it, and that's how you go from semester to next. Or maybe some of us teach case method. So you get a case, you get a teaching notes, students prepare, you discuss it, debates in class. Others of us, and there's some of in this today, that use this fourth option, public content one, rich technology rich one, use all kinds of content, open educational resources, TED videos, YouTube videos, big emphasis on relevance and current events, Teams collaborate using Google Docs, write documents. They do their presentations using videos. And of course, then there's the other integrated design approach, and that is you go start with the learning objectives, develop some rubrics, develop some classroom activities to support that, and then you develop content that supports all of those. Start ending with the content. So let's see here. Rebecca, what did our audience think? So we have an interesting mix here. Some folks, actually most of you, think we should use an integrated course design. A good number of you still are going with the textbook, find a good textbook, a reliable way of doing that. 9% of you have a course coordinated. A relatively small number are doing cases. And then, so it's an interesting mix, but to me personally, I have to say, it's kind of encouraging to see that we have a lot of folks that are thinking about designing a course from an integrated perspective. So what are we talking about when we talk about an integrated course design? Think developed this model, and that's the one that I then also suggest in the, it was the last one on our survey, which most people actually picked. Where we have an integration of learning goals, teaching activities, and assessment. And very important that we start, in this case, by making sure we understand where the students are coming from. From a technology perspective, this is critically important. You need to be sure your students have access to the technology you're going to ask them to use, that they have the bandwidth to do the videos, that they have access to microphones in a quiet environment to participate if you're going to use microphones. Murad Daki last week, when he talked about his rich study abroad experience, talked about students coming from different backgrounds, students in Morocco, students in Atlanta, how you bring them together. Understanding those situational factors from a technology perspective is going to be more important than it is even in the classroom, because in the classroom we have sort of the great equalizer. Everybody's got the same thing and they sit in the same desk. When we move into technology space, this is going to be a very different consideration. And a very important question for you to ask is, what is that? And it's not just what your students can do, but also your capabilities and your skill sets. So I've done this for a while, and I'm quite set up here. Up here, I have a webcasting microphone used by folks in webcasting. I'm running a monitor in front of me with my slides. I have a presentation monitor up there that shows me my next slides. I actually have another monitor here in which I can see you guys. So if I look to the sides, it's because I'm trying to see what you see. So having all of this, creating this environment situationally for your students and for yourself, if you're not prepared to do that, then you should think twice about technology. If you're going to go down that path, you do need to understand that you're going to have to think through all of that. But then we're going to go to the learning goals, and we're going to think about the learning goals and figure out how we're going to measure that. And in technology, there's two ways in which we're going to measure: the grading, the assignments, but also the ability to monitor students. And in my examples, I'll show you how we do that. And then once I've done that and I've decided what are my learning goals, how am I going to assess that, I create some rubrics with which I'm going to guide the learning. And only then do I go and ask, how am I going to teach this content? What kind of content am I going to provide? Is it going to be videos? Is it going to be videos I create? Is it tutorials I'm going to create? And if I'm not going to be in an online environment, but inside in the classroom, is that going to be using clickers? Is that going to be using some kind of polling system? Is that going to be group learning, matched pairs of two students debating about things? Am I going to basically lecture from my PowerPoints, as some of us do, and do with very great effect, very effectively all the time? But picking those tools, whether they're technology driven or not, in an integrated design really is the last step instead of the first step of your thinking. And when you look at going and picking appropriate technologies for in the classroom, for hybrid, or for online, this is a very important set of considerations. So one last consideration before I share my examples, and that is what happens when we go into the learning environment in an online format. There is a very valuable piece of work, and I will share all of these references. Actually, the references are all on my slides already. But there's very interesting work by Garrison, Anderson, and Archer that talks about, and they did this quite a while ago, it talked about what happens when you teach in an online environment that is critically important. We've always had our teaching presence. Me in front of the class, whether it's Sage on stage or whether it is engaged or case-driven or experiential or study abroad, I have my way of engaging my students. I'm hopefully trying to get them to engage with the content in some kind of meaningful, reflective, critical community of inquiry and create that kind of environment. But what's very important, it's always important, but more important when you move into the technology classroom is this social presence. The extent to which you create a community for those students in which they can bring their own emotions and their own social context into the classroom, become real people instead of bored viewers of videos where they just want to flip to the next channel. So from a technology perspective, especially when we move from hybrid to online, creating this social presence in part is a critical part of how you need to create that. So let's talk about some examples and how we would do this. My first example is in a hybrid course. So hybrid course, you know, this could be flipped. It could be some kind of blended format. In my case, students come to class once a week. They come to class for a long period, 4.5 hours. It's an 8-week course. It's a master's degree course, and students are running 2 of these courses per semester. And I'm going to use my technology tool here, very simple tool we're all familiar with, and that is Excel. Using my integrated design model, the first thing I do, and it's important to stress here, this is also how I share the assignment and the work with the students. The first thing I do is I share a rubric with them. The rubric is based on my learning outcomes, and it looks at concrete examples. So for example, in a spreadsheet, I ask the students, what I would like to see is that your column headers tell me what units you are measuring in. That the cells in the column are formatted with the appropriate units, dollars, percentages. This is just, I give them guidance from the beginning that in the end, these are things that are important. I want you to be able to do this well. And so I want you to think about me measuring that, because that's part of what my learning objectives are in this course. I then share with them instructions, and I provide this in stages. I prompt them to do certain tasks to prepare something. In this case, I'm asking them to build a country selection model. They pick 5 variables, up to 15, as little as 15 countries, as many as countries as they can find data for. And I want them to go and build a model. The first stage is go find 5 variables, go find data for 15 countries and put it in a spreadsheet and somehow combine them together in order to come up with an index. I think most of you understand the methodology here. What's very important is I prompt them in this first one to think about their project. And that is, this is not just you going through an exercise for me in Excel, you know, just get this done, please go away. We've talked about in the first courses in this program about entry modes. We talked about the different considerations, whether you are a small, medium, large company. We've talked about whether you have facilitators and intermediaries. And so in your selection of your variables, let's think about what are the important considerations. And so I'm actually bringing critical thinking right here into my, and I do this step by step. Then I ask them to go prepare the assignment, and they all submit this in Excel spreadsheets in the learning environment. And I use the rubric to grade it. The important thing here is that I ask them to do this on time. And there's nothing more beautiful than a learning system to do that, because it tells you to the second whether or not they've submitted it on time. And here I'm also beginning to create a learning environment, that community. And if this is a team project, I have used this in a team project, they have to collaborate to do that and submit it on time. Once this is done, so this is technology. It's just Excel, I understand that. And it's just my learning management system. But these are two technology elements that we all have access to, that in this case, I have asked students, and also important for them to develop the Excel skills. The last step is then to provide, and this is a hybrid course, so when I come to class, we will do a workshop. Or if this is a time sensitive, or because class is canceled, or because it's MLK weekend, when my Monday my class is scheduled, I do it in a video. I do a tutorial and I show them actually how I would do this. And I step that. And then I allow them to rework it. Now, what you're already seeing here is that there's some additional work for the instructor coming up here. Because they're going to rework, and then am I going to regrade the rework? Maybe I'm not. But what I'm doing is I'm instilling that I'm guiding them, I'm providing a framework with them, I'm keeping them in that zone of proximal development, and I allow them to go as far as they possibly can. If they're confused, this video allows them to come back into the zone. And where do I grade? I grade if they submit it on time and I use the rubric. They know exactly what I want. They should be able to do it, and they learn pretty quickly. And of course, the rubrics in later stages get much more complicated. But also, here's where technology comes in. And if this is a classroom and not a hybrid format, you can do this using clickers, or you can do this using submissions or self-reporting. But technology allows me to monitor. I can see if these students are doing their assignments, and I can use tools in my learning system. There are these intelligent agents that will remind the students, your spreadsheet is due in 4 days or in 2 days. I see you haven't done it yet. I don't have to do that. I can get technology to do that monitoring for me and prompt those students. Of course, I can see who went it on time. Did they do it late? Did they do it submitted once or twice? Did they do it and then reworked it before they submit it? It gives me a lot of sense of their learning. And then after I do the video or the tutorial in class, do they actually go and improve the work? Do they rework? And then you can repeat this. And actually, I repeat this cycle 4 times during the course of the semester. Every time more complicated. The second set, we add on methodologies for standardizing, normalizing data, for weighting of the variables. And then we add visualization in the last one, bringing in another technology, in this case, Tableau, getting students to show their spreadsheet in a way that's going to be useful in work. And so here's an example of running a technology-enabled spreadsheet project in class. Example number 2, this is a blended one, and for those of you teaching in a case mode, there may be some interesting elements here. There's also going to be, for those of you running study abroad, some interesting examples, or very importantly, any one of you running cases, team projects. I expect a lot of you are running team projects in your class. So the course I'm teaching this in is a consulting class in which students actually do work for a company, which brings its own challenges. I use as a textbook, as a handbook for this course, the McKinsey Engagement by Paul Frigga, that really is a handbook for how teams solve problems. I'm going to spend just a minute here talking about why that's valuable. So Frigga presents this team focus rules of engagement. The first one is actually the second part of the acronym FOCUS is basically the intellectual conceptual work that all of you are familiar with, getting to frame a question, to organize their research, collect data, to really make sure they understand it and synthesize. This is basic learning theory, moving the team from framing the question, research questions, We've all done that. If you've done a PhD, you've done this many times over. If you've done a research paper many times over, but getting students to think about that process. But more important here is the first part, and that's the team part. Very valuable for framework for getting students to collaborate in teams, and that is getting the teams to understand that at least half of their work is their ability to talk to each other and listen to each other and communicate all the time. Their ability to discuss team dynamics and deal with team dynamics. Their ability to provide each others with assistance when they fall behind, or give each other feedback to make sure that they stay on task in terms of their intellectual activity. And also, yes, to keep each other motivated. And as you will recall, when I talked about the online, moving online, how this community of learning is very important. This is really about creating a community of learning. And it doesn't have to be online. Even in your teaching a team project or a team project in your class, this could be quite valuable. So what does that look like in my course? First of all, we've got a real world project here. Every project is unique. This is not like case teaching where I will have the same case. Everyone is different. They've got to work with a client. It changes, things change all the time. You never know what the dynamics of the client are going to be. For the team has to make a daily commitment to work on the project, or at least checking with their team. This is in completely online context, and so they have to collaborate online. And so you got to provide a platform for them to do this online. We do this in Microsoft Teams. And then, of course, we have the very clear conceptual work here, finding work, problem statement, developing hypotheses, doing the research, interviewing using Skype, Zoom, WebEx, interviewing people all around in the client, in person, doing analysis, in order to develop deliverables. This is something all of us are familiar with. We use it all the time. How would I use technology in this context? Well, I said already, I use Teams for them to collaborate. And the presentations in the end is done using WebEx. So this is a pretty standard technology. My grading in this case, and again, this is where technology becomes very powerful with teamwork, because I can see them working on the teams every day or once a week or whatever my commitment is. I can actually grade their participation in the team. Technology allows me here to avoid the problem we all face in teamwork. And that is that at the end of the semester, you ask the students to grade each other or rate each other as to how they participated, and one gets beat up or everybody gets 5 out of 5. By having a platform in which students collaborate, in which I can see what's happening on, who's posting, what kind of quality of work they're doing, who's running behind, I can actually create grading using a rubric for that. And so technology-enabled learning in this case allows us to really spread that teamwork in such a way that it's not a dynamic problem at the end. Of course, they get graded on how they deliver a research project. And very important part in this case is that the client gives feedback, and actually the client's feedback is part of their grade. For most students in this case, actually getting hired is the most important part of the activity. Technology also allows me to monitor what's going on here. I can participate on meetings with the clients, whether this is online as I do here or whether you do this in person. You can monitor the activity with the team, the engagement with the case, if it's a case and not a consulting project. It allows me to monitor activity all throughout the project and the semester and the team's ability to, and also to provide guided feedback to individual students to do that. I can monitor how they're doing on the research, provide the appropriate guides and tools. And actually, I've developed a whole number of short tutorial videos, or I sent them to work done by other professional organizations to support this. I can refer them to other results on here. So there we have a team consulting experience. Last one, again, it's going to be a Excel version one. This is a fully online course in which students are asked to put a projected forecast modeling. Now, why do I do this in IB? You'll see that towards the end here, how in international business this is used. Students basically get, again, stages. They get learning objective, very specific rubrics, increased complexity every time. They get stage step-by-step instructions on what I want them to do in this project. Students prepare the spreadsheet models here and submit them, again, monitored online. I use the same kind of approach here. This is fully online, so all of the video tutorials are step-by-step videos that I have prepared for students that they can watch, and they can only see these tutorials after they've submitted their work. Again, technology enabled. And then I add complexity. And so here's where the IB part comes in. The first stage of this project, they basically are all, they have a company, they got 3 products, you know, they build basically income statement, projected forecast model for raw materials, labor, machinery, building these 3 products over a period of time. And they just build basic financials. And so depending on what program you are in, they may have that. You may need to provide a more complex, more detailed instructions on that. Once they've completed that, I go to stage 2 of the project when we go through this. And now I add multiple countries. So now they have to sell the product in 3 different countries, and they have to source their raw materials from 3 different countries. I still have all of this dollar-based. And then in the last stage of the project, those same 3 countries for markets, same 3 countries for sourcing, they have to do this in local currency. I provide for them a forecast for the exchange rates for all those currencies for the forecast period. And so what happens in this case is quite interesting, is that students, once they're done with this project, the whole idea of impact of exchange rates and of course tax rates is another one, really brings to life all those things we teach in IB in a powerful way. In this case, grading happens again. Once students submitted their project, I grade it, and I grade against the rubric. The rubric is simple in the beginning, more complicated at the end, and I provide video tutorials to do that. Again, what technology allows me to do is to monitor what's going on all along the way, to provide feedback and support to the students to do that. If you were to be in a classroom and doing a project like this, you can use, certainly you can use rubrics. You can have students share examples of best work in class, or you can even have students upload their worksheets, especially best product worksheets for students. And so those are various examples of how to use, and this is technology. This is not all, you know, and I very deliberately, for instance, I did not talk about clickers today in how I use them, because I know that that's response systems. Salomon is going to talk about a little bit later in another webinar. What are my takeaways? Big takeaways here is that in the end, that if you're going to work in different modes, online, face-to-face, blended, you need to think about designing your course and your technology and how you do this for that mode. You cannot do it all of it. And you have to be experimental and innovative. And I can tell you what I've just shared with you in these 3 is 12 years worth of work of constant refinement. I build this based on research. I shared that with you. I think that's very important to go and take the learnings of others and apply it. I think in terms of integrating this in technology into the classroom, this idea that you have to build a community of inquiry in which students participate and not passive participants observers is a very important part of your technology choices. Two last very important points. This takes a lot of time and resources, which is one thing I think many faculty already discovered. This is one thing educational leadership is discovering right now, is that it takes as much money to do online as it does a regular classroom. This is not a money and time saving approach. And if you don't have institutional support, you cannot do this. And with that, I am going to turn this over back to Tamer.
I'll start with one of your comments, Jacobus, experimentation. I think you have to keep it interesting for yourself as well. I mean, one value about experimenting, being open-minded and trying different things with your students is that you keep it interesting for yourself. So from semester to semester, you do something different, and this way we motivate each other. There's a lot of questions, and we may not be able to get to all of them, but I'll start with a few. And we appreciate everybody's attendance here. We had over 100 people here in the room right now. And there's a lot of good questions too. The very first one actually reminded me when I started teaching for the first time. That was just a couple of years ago. This colleague is asking, I'm a new lecturer. I'm just graduated. It's my first time to teach, and I'm assigned a lengthy course, 3 hours plus course. What do you suggest? So I remembered one of the mistakes that I made. I tried to cover too much content and sacrifice comprehension. I think one of the things you need to do is to make sure that your students are still with you and you have not lost them. And they are processing, they're digesting, they're comprehending. I think this is very important. It's more important than making sure that you cover the entire book or entire modules. Secondly, vary the format. Make sure that you have a blended approach. You have short exercises, classroom exercises, you have some cases, you have maybe a video, a short video, a talk by a CEO that you can find on McKinsey Quarterly, for example, or a McKinsey website, and make sure that you're varying it, you're breaking it up along monotony. But let's get to some of the questions that Jacobus can answer. One of the questions is on online assessment techniques. It may be a little bit more difficult, maybe easy. I think you alluded to this, Jacobus. How do you measure performance with your online courses?
So I think that's actually a fabulous question, and you know, there's a lot of debate going on this right now. Two things. I think that the ability to credibly deliver multiple choice exams online is a futile effort. It is a matter of students coming up with ways to cheat, companies building solutions for students to cheat. So we have to change the way you test, measure learning. And so as the examples I showed, it's really work product based. And so can they, in the example, does their selection of variables reflect their ability to think about different entry modes? And can they then turn that into a work product? And so this does require a different kind of assessment. And it also allows you to give students feedback in a different way than before. And so I think that assessment is not going to be as much multiple choice driven in the online environment. It is work product driven, and technology allows you to give students very specific feedback. And a lot of this can be automated. You know, any of those of us that used turn it in as a plagiarizing tester, you know, if you give students, you can develop a bank of responses that you can click and just add comments into a paper that you built in a separate document and just paste them in there. So there are all kinds of technology tools to give students feedback. And the old Pareto principle applies here. 80% of the comments you provide are the same to every student in the class. Where are your sources? What are your citations? And so I think that it changes the assessment that way.
One of the examples you talked about was the team consulting project. In that consulting project, do you assign roles and responsibilities for different players? Do you have a leader for the team or a project coordinator, a steering committee, and then even expectations from the client's point of view, are those set explicitly up front?
They are. So in terms of the teams, I create the teams, and the teams are typically created based on the skill sets of the students. In this specific case, I have projects. Sometimes the project is data based, sometimes it's marketing based, sometimes it's operationally. So the teams are created based on skill sets, and also thinking about the backgrounds of the students to bring disciplines to bear that would facilitate the project. The teams are asked to create a charter. And Frigga's book provides a very nice framework to think about that. What is very different from doing this online versus in the classroom is that I can be part of their meetings by seeing what they submit, and I can help them work through the difficult dynamics throughout the semester, instead of when it gets so hot that they cannot work anymore, then one of the students leaves or wants to work on their own. So the teams need to come up with that, but I very much serve as a coach in that project for the students.
One of our colleagues is asking, what tools are best for effective team collaboration? What works best?
Yeah, this can be tricky. I can say the most reliable, most straightforward one is whether it's Office 365. At Georgia State, our students all have access to 365, so that's a great tool. Or Google Docs, because it's very easy to use. Many of them are familiar. It doesn't cost them money or a lot of money. They can collaborate. So I would say that's your baseline for collaboration. Now, the collaboration environment, your learning system may have that. We use Desire to Learn Brightspace at Georgia State. And so you can create teams in collaboration and Dropboxes for them there. You can also use a tool like Microsoft Teams, in which students work together as they would professionally collaborate as teams. And so that depends on how much you want to learn. Teams is not easy. And you're going to ask your students to master that technology. The flip side of that is if students have used Teams effectively, they put that on their resume. And it changes completely what happens. And I can tell you, we've seen that with these projects, with teams have worked and team collaboration. Clients are looking for that. Actually, clients do these projects for me, not because we do free work for them. We do powerful free work for them. They do it to find good students and to test them and to see them at work. And so, but that means that you also have to be willing to master that. So I would say Google Docs is probably your baseline for that collaboration environment in your learning system, assuming that there's facility for doing that. And the high end would be Microsoft Teams.
A quick question. Do you think it's possible to use simulations in an online class? One of our colleagues asks.
Absolutely. And in some way, the last model I shared of the spreadsheets, you could use a simulation. You could have very clear expectations and the students do their iterations. What is more difficult with simulations is your ability to see what they are doing and to provide guided feedback to them. Some simulation tools do that, but I think that third one of my examples, you can run a simulation that way very easily.
One of the questions, Jacobus, is what LMS system, learning management system, is your school using to create activities for teams and for teams to collaborate? I know it varies from college to college. In our case, we have the iCollege system, and some platforms are better than others. But what are your thoughts about that?
So iCollege is actually Desire to Learn's Brightspace. It's just customized for Georgia's system as iCollege, and it provides actually quite a powerful team collaboration space. And it's the same collaboration space students use for their classes. So I would recommend that is, if that is available, that you do that. We in executive education, we do use Canvas. It's another space where you can do this. And Blackboard. Blackboard provides collaborative space as well. Zoom, not so much. WebEx is another group collaboration within WebEx is another possibility if your institution has that platform available.
So you talked a little bit about Jacobus student feedback to your various pedagogy experiments. What has been your experience from the students? Does it vary over time? And in the same class, perhaps you have some more excited than others?
Okay, so now it's time for honesty here, huh? I have to tell you, you have to, maybe less so now because we are so forced into this environment. But early on, you had to be brave. I can tell you, if I took a class from face-to-face to hybrid, I sacrificed 0.5 or even a whole point on student evaluations in my first semesters doing that. And so, you know, your chair has to be willing to let you do that, and your college needs to be willing to do that. But as you learn, you recover that. So that's the first thing. This is not for the very strong teacher. This is risky space. Second thing is, for some students, this is going to put a lot of work on the students. You're actually going to see what the students do. You're actually going to see when they're participating in their team, instead of being freeloaders are not going to like this, okay? And so freeloaders are going to show you in their student evaluations they don't like that. But it's for me always been offset by qualitative responses by students that talk about, this is the best learning experience I've ever had. This is the best class I've had. And I've had that consistently. I mean, sometimes I think it's also overgenerous, but I do think that you can provide a very powerful learning experience. And for the student that wants to learn, you will get that feedback, you know. And so, but yes, the freeloaders, they're not going to be liking this very much.
What sort of online simulation software? One colleague is asking for a good review of a collection of various simulation software. Please go to probably the best knowledge source, knowledge portal on the web, Global Edge. Yeah, Global Edge is something that CIBERs have also, in particular Michigan State University CIBER, has developed over the years. It's got a lot of instructional materials, resources for educators like us. And one of the things you'll find there is a long list of simulations and short reviews on that. So I think with that, we need to close. Jacobus, I want to thank you so much for getting us going. This has been very beneficial from my point of view, and hopefully colleagues elsewhere as well. We encourage people to respond to the survey and also suggest topics for future webinars. Please tell us what is of interest to you so we can respond to your needs. And we have not been able to get to all of the questions, and we'll try to go through them and respond to you separately as well. So with that, I want to thank Jacobus Boers today, who's been a great speaker, and also in the background, Hannah and Rebecca for making this event possible. And look for that survey to come, and look forward to seeing you in another one of our webinars. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.